Reno Hill Siege. The desperate hours after Custer's last stand. 12 soldiers died and 21 were wounded in just the first few hours of fighting on Reno Hill. Hundreds of warriors surrounded them, and the hope for survival seemed more fragile than ever. The uncertain wait around 5 p.m. June 25, 1876, for approximately 30 minutes, the men positioned on Reno Hill had been hearing gunfire echoing from the west. The sound carried ominously across the battlefield, drawing attention and concern. Hundreds of warriors, who had been assaulting their position, suddenly redirected their attack, rushing westward toward the source of the gunfire. The soldiers watched intently as dust clouds rose in the distance. After half an hour of observation, a grim consensus formed among them. Custer's column was under heavy attack from the redirected warriors. Despite this apparent crisis, no clear course of action emerged. Among the officers, some argued that Custer would likely retreat northward to rendezvous with the Montana column, though they acknowledged he remained severely outnumbered and in desperate need of reinforcement. Major Marcus Reno was notably absent from these critical discussions. Instead of participating in tactical planning, he had descended into a ravine below the hill, searching for the body of Lieutenant Benjamin Hodgson, his closest friend in the regiment. This personal mission took precedence, while his officers anxiously awaited leadership regarding the emergency unfolding to the west. "Where's Reno when we need him?" muttered one of the lieutenants, pacing nervously along the defensive perimeter. Upon locating Hodgson's body, Reno collected a few personal effects before returning to the hilltop. His first order was not to organize a relief effort for Custer, but to send a detail to bury Hodgson's remains. "Sir, what about Colonel Custer?" asked a young captain, his voice tense with urgency. The subsequent debate centered primarily on ammunition supplies. Reno was adamant. "We cannot move until our ammunition is replenished. That's final." The supply train had not yet reached the battlefield, leaving them critically short of resources for an extended engagement. Taking practical action, Reno dispatched his most skilled cavalrymen to locate the supply train and bring forward several mules carrying ammunition. While Reno focused on logistics, a captain from Benton's battalion grew increasingly impatient with the delay. "I won't stand by while our brothers are slaughtered," he declared, gathering volunteers to march toward Custer's position. This impulsive rescue attempt quickly confronted harsh reality. The captain and his men advanced only a short distance before comprehending the true scale of their disadvantage. Between 1,000 and 2,000 warriors stood against their combined force of roughly 400 soldiers. Tactical assessment immediately superseded bravery. The captain returned, his face grim. "There are too many. We'd be riding to certain death." The combined forces under Reno and Benton reached a sobering conclusion. Their only chance for survival lay in fortifying their position on Reno Hill and holding out as long as possible. Men began digging rifle pits and creating defensive positions, using whatever tools and materials they could find. "Dig deeper," men ordered, Benton supervising the hasty fortifications. "Our lives depend on how well we can hold this ground." As dusk approached, the soldiers worked frantically to prepare for what they knew would be a desperate fight. The distant gunfire from Custer's direction had already fallen silent, a detail that few mentioned, but all noticed with growing dread. The Weir Point advance, a desperate gambit. Captain Thomas Weir of Benton's battalion paced anxiously along the perimeter of Reno Hill, his patience wearing thin with each passing minute. The continued absence of orders to assist Custer gnawed at him. The sounds of distant gunfire had become sporadic, heightening his concern for his fellow soldiers. Fighting somewhere to the west, unable to contain himself any longer, Weir approached Major Reno directly. "Sir, request permission to take my company toward Colonel Custer's position," he said, his voice tense with urgency. What should have been a straightforward military exchange quickly deteriorated. The long-standing personal animosity between the two officers surfaced immediately, transforming the request into a heated argument. "You will maintain your position," Captain Reynolds responded coldly, where his face flushed with anger and frustration, turned abruptly and walked away. Military protocol abandoned. He mounted his horse and spurred it westward, alone and unauthorized, toward the sound of Custer's battle. This impulsive act of insubordination created a cascade of confusion within the command structure. Weir's lieutenant, observing his captain's departure and mistakenly believing Reno had approved the movement, quickly assembled Company D. Within minutes, the entire company was galloping after their commander, creating a de facto advance that no senior officer had actually ordered. Weir and his company rode approximately 1 mile west, halting atop a prominent hill near 3 peaks that would later bear his name. From this elevated position, they strained to make sense of the activity. Still visible about 3 miles distant, the battle appeared to be winding down, but isolated pockets of activity continued across the landscape. After several minutes of observation, the terrible reality began to register. Warriors were riding in circles around the slopes of what would later be known as Last Stand Hill, firing downward at objects on the ground. Most alarmingly, Weir could see the regimental colors had been captured. God help them, Weir muttered, though he didn't yet fully comprehend that the warriors were systematically killing wounded soldiers who remained alive on the battlefield. Back on Reno Hill, command cohesion had completely disintegrated. Captain Bentini watched in bewilderment as one of his companies departed toward the sound of gunfire, followed shortly by a company from Reno's battalion. The movement suggested a general advance was underway. "Are we moving out?" Bentini asked a nearby lieutenant. "No orders, sir," came the reply. "They're just going." This command vacuum reflected the psychological state of the officers. No clear orders were being issued by Reno, and if any had been, they were being ignored. In the chaos, the normal military hierarchy had essentially collapsed under the pressure of the situation. The arrival of a lieutenant with 2 mules, carrying ammunition from the supply train, provided Bentini with the resources he needed to make his own decision. "Get the ammunition distributed," he ordered. His men were moving out to support Weir. Even as Reno ordered his bugler to sound the recall, Benton's companies were already in motion, effectively rendering Reno's authority meaningless. In the moment, the traditional chain of command had been supplanted by the initiative of subordinate officers. Responding to the crisis, when Bentini and his 3 companies reached Weir's position, he immediately recognized the tactical vulnerability of their location. He deployed his men in a semicircular skirmish line, but his military experience told him they were exposed. "This is a terrible place to fight Indians," Bentini observed to his officers, noting the hill offered excellent visibility but virtually no cover. "We're standing in the middle of a dinner plate." The gunfire from Custer's direction had now largely ceased, a telling silence that experienced frontier soldiers understood all too well. Meanwhile, warriors were beginning to notice the new American position and were redirecting their attention toward Weir Point. Bentini made a tactical assessment and decided to withdraw as he and Weir began leading their men back toward Reno Hill. They encountered Reno himself, leading the remainder of the command forward, including wounded men and the pack train. "Major, we need to return to your original position," Bentini advised firmly. "The hill you left is far more defensible, and the warriors are already moving against us." As if to punctuate Benton's warning, gunfire erupted from the skirmish line he had left behind. The warriors, who had been 3 miles distant, were now closing rapidly, with the first wave less than 1,000 yards away. The bugler sounded retreat, and the companies abandoned Weir Point in sequence. Riding hard back toward Reno Hill, the warriors seized the vacated position mere seconds after the last soldiers departed, turning what had been an orderly withdrawal into a race for survival. "Keep moving, don't bunch up," shouted a sergeant as warriors closed to within firing range. Several veteran soldiers automatically formed rear guard positions, providing covering fire for their retreating comrades. In some cases, this devolved into hand-to-hand combat as warriors caught up with the slowest riders. Private Thompson, a seasoned cavalryman, found himself surrounded by 3 warriors, firing his revolver with one hand while controlling his horse with the other. He managed to break through their encirclement. "They were so close, I could smell the paint on their faces," he later recalled. As the warriors pressed their attack more aggressively, the retreat accelerated into a full gallop. Soldiers pounded into the perimeter of their original position on Reno Hill, hastily dismounting and scrambling to reestablish their defensive positions. "Get those horses to the center," Bentini ordered as men dragged fallen comrades into the relative safety of the perimeter. Sharpshooters to the high points, everyone else digging the failed advance to Weirpoint, had cost valuable time and several additional casualties, but it had confirmed what many already suspected. Custer's command had met with disaster, and their own survival now depended entirely on how well they could defend Reno Hill until reinforcements arrived. The siege of Reno Hill holding the line. This would be the last time they left the hilltop for the next 24 hours as the main force scrambled back to their original defensive position. Lieutenant Edward Godfrey's Company K automatically assumed their traditional role as rear guard, forming a skirmish line to slow the pursuing warriors and buy precious time for the others to re-establish the perimeter. "Hold steady, men. Controlled fire," Godfrey shouted above the din of gunfire, his voice steady despite the chaos surrounding them. Once the bulk of the command had reached the relative safety of the hill, Reno and Bentini quickly organized a defensive perimeter. Along its edges, most companies formed a loose circle, but several units extended along a thin ridge at one end of the formation, creating what resembled a frying pan with a handle. This improvised formation maximized their use of the limited terrain features available. "Get those horses and mules to the center," Bentini ordered, his battlefield experience evident in his calm efficiency. "Wounded men too. Everyone else find cover and prepare to return fire." In the center of this defensive position, Dr. Henry Porter, now the command's only surviving surgeon, established a makeshift field hospital in a shallow depression with minimal supplies and no assistance except for a few detailed soldiers. He worked frantically to treat the mounting casualties. "Water, I need more water for these men." Porter called out, his hands already slick with blood, as he moved from one wounded soldier to another. The hospital quickly became a place of particular suffering. Without adequate medical supplies or proper shelter, the wounded lay exposed to both the elements and enemy fire. Their moans and occasional screams added to the psychological burden of those still fighting along the outer perimeter. Soldiers pressed themselves flat against the ground to present the smallest possible target. The hilltop offered virtually no natural cover. No trees, no large rocks, no earthworks. Men desperately improvised protection, using saddles or hardtack boxes as shields against the incoming bullets. Private Williams wedged his saddle between two small mounds of dirt and crouched behind it. "Better than nothing," he muttered to the soldier beside him, "but I wouldn't bet my life on it stopping a bullet." "Too late for that," his companion replied grimly. "We already have within minutes." More than 1,000 warriors had surrounded the hill, and gunfire erupted from all directions. The initial attack came as a mounted charge, warriors riding directly toward the perimeter in an attempt to overwhelm it. Through sheer momentum and numbers, "Hold fire until they're within range," Bentini called out, walking calmly behind the line of soldiers. "Make every shot count, boys." When the warriors came within effective range, the disciplined volley fire of the troopers proved devastatingly effective. Dozens of warriors fell, and the charge faltered and broke apart before reaching the perimeter. After this initial repulse, the warriors adapted their tactics. They surrounded the hill completely, occupying every high point in the vicinity, and settling in for what was clearly becoming a siege, rather than a direct assault. A native sharpshooter, concealed on a knoll several hundred yards away, quickly demonstrated the vulnerability of the American position with precision fire from what soldiers later identified as a Winchester repeating rifle. He killed two soldiers in quick succession before they even realized where the shots were coming from. "Sniper on the north ridge," shouted Sergeant Butler. "Everyone down." Several soldiers returned toward the sniper's position, the concentrated volleys eventually silencing him, though whether he was hit or simply relocated remained unknown. From another direction, warriors launched another probing attack, testing the defense for weaknesses. This pattern repeated itself multiple times throughout the afternoon. Warriors would concentrate their numbers, advance toward a section of the perimeter, only to be driven back by the soldiers' disciplined fire, while the defenders successfully prevented any direct breaches of their position. They continued to suffer steady casualties from the warriors' fire. The randomness of death added to the psychological strain. Private Johnson, believing himself safe behind a hardtack box, died instantly when a bullet penetrated the supposed shelter and struck him in the head. Another soldier, Corporal Mason, was hit in the abdomen while manning an exposed section of the line. His position was so vulnerable that his comrades couldn't immediately retrieve him without exposing themselves to concentrated fire. As Mason's pain intensified, he began screaming in agony. Captain Weir, positioned nearby, quickly recognized the danger this presented Mason. "You've got to stay quiet," Weir urged, crawling closer to the wounded man. "They're targeting your voice." Each time Mason cried out, warriors directed a hail of bullets toward his position. With remarkable self-control, the wounded man bit down on his belt and suppressed his screams. By the time his comrades managed to drag him to the hospital area, during a lull in the firing, he had already died from his wounds. He saved at least 3 other men by staying quiet. Weir later remarked solemnly, "In the center of the hill, the horses and mules became easy targets for the warriors' fire. Dozens of animals were killed in short order, their bodies collapsing where they stood still." Tied together in picket lines, soldiers dragged the carcasses of these unfortunate beasts toward the hospital area, using them as makeshift barricades to shelter the wounded. "Use anything that might stop a bullet," Reno ordered, finally showing some tactical leadership. Dead horses' saddles, hardtack boxes, pile it all around the wounded. For approximately 3 hours, the warriors continued their attempts to overwhelm the hilltop position. Their pattern became recognizable. They would unleash heavy volleys of fire and then prepare for a charge. But each time, the soldiers would rise up in coordinated response, their disciplined return fire disrupting the attacks before they could fully develop. Lieutenant Wallace observed the pattern with grim satisfaction. "They want this hill, but they're not willing to pay the price to take it." He told his men, "Stay steady, and we'll see nightfall." The cost of these first chaotic hours was severe. 12 soldiers had been killed and 21 wounded, bringing the total number of injured under Dr. Porter's care to 30 by sunset on June 25th. Porter worked tirelessly, performing emergency surgeries with minimal equipment and no anesthesia beyond the small supply of whiskey in the medical kit. "Hold him down," Porter instructed as he prepared to extract a bullet from a trooper's shoulder. "This is going to hurt, son, but it needs to come out." The final hours of that evening became simply a matter of survival. Until darkness fell, the defenders knew that Plains Indians traditionally avoided night fighting, and they desperately hoped this cultural practice would give them a brief respite to strengthen their position and tend to their wounded. As the sun began to set over the Little Bighorn Valley, the intensity of fire gradually diminished. The warriors withdrew to slightly greater distances, maintaining their encirclement but reducing their direct attacks. Night on Reno Hill. The desperate hours throughout the hill